Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 3 of On the Radar. This is Zaki Khalid.
And this is Talal Ibrahim.
On the Radar is presented by Pakistan Geostrategic Review in association with the Center for Strategic and Contemporary Research, CSCR, based in Islamabad. We've invited Mr. Hamraz Sarwani on account of his recent commentary titled CPEC, A Promise in the Dark. In this article, Hamraz argues that the political, strategic, and economic aspects of CPEC should be integrated while evaluating its progress instead of employing them separately in isolation. Our viewers on YouTube can find the link to his piece in the description. Hamraz, thank you for joining us. Before we begin, can you please let us know what motivated you to write this piece?
Thank you very much, Zaki, for having me. And yes, we've been working on CPEC for some time here at the CSCR. And this year has been a very crucial year for CPEC. There have been many turbulences, a global pandemic, and much more. So lately, a study came out by Andrew Small that apprised of the recent delays and theorized those delays in a certain way. So we found those facts and those observations very compelling, and we thought it very necessary to respond to it in some way. So that's why we thought to write it.
Okay.
So, Hamraz, you, uh, you talked about the interaction between two different governance cultures when referring to the donor and recipient. You said that, quote unquote, which was built for a different kind of development, coming from a different culture, trumpeting the greatness of a different power center, that is the West, Britain and the United States. So, what did you mean by these lines in your piece?
Yeah, you see, these social and political institutions in Pakistan have evolved a very certain way. We have a political culture, a governance culture that we inherited from our colonial past, and then the foreign interventions, financial and political both, um, aid infrastructure and structural adjustment regimes, they further shaped our institutions a certain way. So when Chinese finances came in, they came with a different aspiration from a different political culture, from a different governance culture. So there is a very unique ontological struggle between two cultures as far as CPEC is concerned. So in that context, I meant actually I was referring to this ontological struggle between two cultures. For example, many analysts believe that, for example, bureaucratic red tape is one of the major challenges to the CPEC. So this is one allusion to the point I was trying to make there.
My question for you, Hamraz, is that you wrote and you've emphasized very strongly in your article that security will remain a very key factor in the development and evolution of CPEC because of internal political dissent and changing economic realities. And we all know that this situation has not been different in the previous political regimes also. But do you think that that factor has played a significant impact on the way people, especially international observers or local observers, as a matter of fact, perceive the salience of this project? Is it too emphasized? Is it overemphasized?
The security aspect.
Yes.
Yes, Pakistan has a very unique case of its own. We have to accept the reality that there are certain things in Pakistan, certain things to the country. Uh, Pakistan was born with a security paranoia. Pakistan has evolved with a security paranoia. Security has always remained and will remain a very important aspect in Pakistan and for Pakistan. So for sure in CPEC, the kind of challenges that Pakistan is having and is going to have, security has to remain a very key aspect to the CPEC. So I think.
But do you think that? But do you think that the fact that Pakistan has always been in a sort of dilemma regarding security, and that is one of the reasons why international observers make it a point to focus on that aspect more as compared to the economic aspect, because you've mentioned in your article that there needs to be a careful balance between these two aspects.
Yes, in my article, the point I wanted to make is that we cannot very clearly differentiate between the economics and security and politics, especially in Pakistan. If we look at the recent development practices prevalent in Pakistan, the previous development practices, they have always occurred in a close nexus with the security formations. You can see during the military regimes in Pakistan, Pakistan got the most soft dollar access, and likewise, Pakistan experienced softer, lenient debt servicing infrastructure when military was in direct rule here. So Pakistan is a very security oriented state, but that security orientation is not only security orientation. The point I wanted to make, it is the political
Exactly.
orientation also, because that is the nature of the context of the regional political context that Pakistan is in. Like Dr. Maliha Lodi once said, if we could put Pakistan somewhere else, we would, but we have to uh, make up with whatever we have.
Indeed.
Okay, so quite interestingly, one article was I just came across this article that was published in Jamestown Foundation. Uh, um, they are now come up with this fancy new terminology known as the Himalayan Quad. Uh, there is this concerted attempt, I would say, from certain from the academicians and think tankers sitting in certain places who are now trying to or trying to securitize every initiative taken by the Chinese. So this interesting article.
I think it was
Uh,
Jagannath Panda.
Yes, exactly. So even there, they have tried to somehow project this that China's framework of infrastructural diplomacy and development in this Himalayan region, these countries, it is impossible not to view the initiative through a security prism. So again, I think we need to look at what's happening in Pakistan and the Chinese initiatives again from a very from a very from a very objective viewpoint. So I would somehow I would concur with the observation that has been made by Hamras that there is this security viewpoint, but there is this political viewpoint as well. So we need to focus more on that. Okay, so Amraj, a very interesting line in your article, and this is the very last line of your piece, in which you have mentioned, last but not the least, academics and analysts ought to find a balance between critique and euphoria, and pessimism and optimism. I do understand that the people in Pakistan, most of
I
the
think that was a very fantastic point, if I may add. That was a very good point made by Hamraz.
and yes, and not only here, but also because you have reviewed a piece of Andrew Small, Dr. Rabia. We tend to go overboard in our assessments of how things are happening. So I would like you to shed more light on this particular phraseology that you have employed here in this article of yours.
Yeah, again, that was in connection with the recent comment that I made, that we have to accept that we have to accept the prevalent strategizations and politicizations that exist in the world. And anything like CPEC has to take place in the same world. So all those strategic and political formations have to have certain impacts on things like CPEC.
You have mentioned the balance between quote unquote critique and euphoria and pessimism and optimism.
Yes, again, like the comment I just made, any development has to take place in a highly strategized yet politicized space. This is another line from the article. I'm just repeating it. But the thing I meant by that is we have to accept the realities, and we have to accept that CPEC it, it, CPEC can neither be an absolute game changer, and nor it can be a total failure. So we in the
So you mean to say we have to strike the right balance. So what are the prevalent narratives out there? The narratives that according to your assessment, borders on critique, too much critique, and the narratives that are too much euphoric. So what are some of the prevalent narratives out there?
Yes, one of the narratives that is mostly coming from Western academia and something what we call the global civil society is very much fixated on the human rights aspect of the Chinese regime and the security aspect of the whole BRI. So that is not very cool to do. We have to see that all the previous financial interactions that China had with other countries and nations were not as brutal as the ones those nations had with the IMF or the World Bank. Like in the Far Eastern economies after the 1997 Asian financial crisis, around it was around 2002 or 2003 when China initiated early harvest trade regimes with the Far Eastern economies. So it was very unprecedented. It was not experienced before in the world, because whenever finances came from the Western financial institutions or international financial institutions, as we call them, they came with very certain security agendas, with very certain territorial and political agendas that did more than the problems they solved. They created more problems than that. So there is no, you can say, the rule of thumb in it, that if the foreign finances are coming and if China is like this, Chinese political regime is like this, China has certain political norms, it will definitely inculcate those norms into the borrower countries or something like that. Chinese financial governance is very much nuanced as compared to the Western financial governances that we've had.
Speaking of the Chinese financial governance, you're obviously focusing your entire perspective on the approach of China. And one of the interesting lines, one of the several interesting lines from your article, which I extracted, you write that a single top down approach to policy making vis a vis CPEC should be discouraged, and political, territorial, environmental grievances should be sufficiently addressed. These are some very pertinent observations. So, uh, would you place the onus of this on the government of Pakistan to be mindful of these aspects, or would you say that this is something which the Chinese Politburo or the country itself should advance and push in Pakistan? Because obviously, when we talk about infrastructural systems in place, as you have mentioned, we do not have that sort of a culture to be mindful of these things. So, who would you place the onus on to?
The onus is obviously on the Pakistani government first, because in CPEC, all the border countries are not just the passive recipients of Chinese finances and Chinese political culture; they are very
Mhm.
active recipients to it. And in environmental aspect, governance aspect, energy aspect, many of the choices have been made by the borrower countries themselves, and China was not necessarily pushing for them. So this is a very bilateral street, and borrower countries have governments especially have much say in it. So, borrower countries, especially the Pakistani government, has a big responsibility to be mindful of these aspects and these issues that it can face through the progress of the CPEC. And also, it is also we have a historical case also, as we were talking about the skepticisms and skeptic international narratives about CPEC and BRI. We
Yes.
have a we have a historical case of our colonial past. We have a historical case of IMF's financial governance and structural adjustment regimes, and we know that what things can go wrong and how we should know, we should learn from them. Those experiences should inform our present experience, that what should we not do here and how can we protect this.
So Hamraz, sorry to interject. Let me just add a sub question to this one because your discussion has come to this point. You talked about the IMF, very good historical examples which you've given, but we all know in Pakistan, as far as our domestic understanding is concerned, that when the IMF wanted to impose some sort of a behavioral change in the system, it adopted a technique of coercion and some sort of a slight coercion. Because, as you mentioned rightly, the colonial leftovers which form the core of our institutional systems, don't you think that that is what China will also should be mindful of and adopt the same techniques, or will we just sit and wait for Islamabad to learn from historical lessons, which I'm sorry to say I don't see that ever happening in history.
Yeah, you're right. You're very right actually there. We cannot definitely sit and wait for anything to happen here. We, as citizens, as civil society stakeholders, as academicians, should push for the things that we think are necessary. But still, we cannot say much about the government. What will they do, what political context they are made in, and what political slogans they have carried along. So this is a very complex case. We cannot very, yeah.
So my last question for you is, as far as political sloganeering is concerned, finally, just to sum up your individual perspective, if I were to ask you that perhaps the state of Pakistan's strategic communications has proven to be ineffective, hence we see that security as compared to economics has dominated the external perception of CPEC. Would you agree with that, or would you say that that is still a debatable thing?
Could you repeat the point, please?
I'm saying that would you agree to the assertion that perhaps faulty strategic communications on behalf of the government of Pakistan have facilitated the external misperception around CPEC, focusing more on security instead of economics?
These
Do you
things,
think that's a communications problem?
not entirely on Pakistan's part. This thing does have a part in it, but the most part there is on the Western biases against China, I can say.
Interesting. Interesting. Well, Hamraz, it was a pleasure to have you on the show, and these were some very interesting perspectives which you shared with us. And once again, I'd like to request the audience that you can read Hamraz's piece for CSCR in the description of the YouTube video. And the same will also be available on the official Twitter account PGR Podcast, as well as CSCR_PK on Twitter. Hamraz, it was a pleasure to have you. Thank you very much, and we look forward to further writings from you.
Thank you very much.